So inshallah, the first session of the morning, we'll probably have a lot of people coming in throughout. Alhamdulillah, the room usually fills up, so I'm assuming the same thing will happen. We will stay for as long as we can for questions and answers, and then you can find us at our booth. If you look up when you walk in, you'll be able to see us, inshallah. We are with Amana Mutual Funds, and though we are with one of the oldest and largest Islamic mutual funds companies, this is a very educational session. One of the biggest questions that we tend to get is, where do I get started, or what do I do first when it comes to financial planning? And the brother sitting in front, that's a little bit of what we're talking about. And there's something called a financial order of operations, where you first do your emergency funds, then your 401k match, then your Roth IRA. All of us are happy to help talk to you about this. I'm going to introduce our two speakers today. Our first speaker today is going to be Samar Tariq. She's from our New Jersey area. She's been in the financial planning area for the last 10 years, and she came to us very recently from JP Morgan Chase. She's been there for 5 years. And then we have a wealth of knowledge, mashallah, with Owaiz sitting next to her, who's been in the industry for 30 plus years. And before being with us for 15 years, he was at Wells Fargo for over 19 years. So really, if there's a financial question you come up with, inshallah, they can help you. Owaiz is from the West Coast. Samar is from the East Coast. I myself, alhamdulillah, this is my 9th year here at MAS. I'm local to Chicago. I've been in the finance industry for 20 years now. Before doing this for 9 years, I was in the home finance industry. So inshallah, between the three of us, we should be able to answer any question you have, almost. We won't get into fatwas though. That's one thing that we don't do. With that, I'll let Samar get started. And we do have some giveaways for those who participate. And inshallah, if you do, then just come get your prizes at the end, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you so much for coming out and taking the step to learn more on Islamic investing. And we're going to get right into it. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alihi. So I'm going to take you through what it's like investing with Amana Mutual and a bit more on Islamic finance. So we're going to start with some disclosures, right? So make sure that you're always doing your homework when it comes to any kind of investing, and that past performance is not a guarantee of future results. So why would you want to save and invest? Think about it. So whatever money that you have saved up, it's tied to some sort of goal. Whether or not you've set that goal yet, that's a different story, but all the money that you're saving, it is tied to something. And if you identify that goal, then you can now plan for it. Because if you're not planning for it, you run the risk of not being able to achieve it. So what are some things that people save and invest for? Maybe you want to save for buying a home. As we've all seen, home prices have just been increasing over the last couple of decades, and they will continue to do so. We've seen what interest rates have done, and we've seen how expensive it is. So it requires a certain discipline of saving and investing. Or maybe you want to save for Hajj. Hajj is now upwards of $15,000 to $20,000 per person, and some people might even think that, hey, I might never be able to afford that. But you can learn that with the right strategy, you can also save and invest for Hajj. Or maybe you're thinking about your kids. Maybe they're young right now, and you want to save for their college education. And we can also go over college education accounts. But then there's also your own health and your own retirement, right? So you don't want to be in retirement just waiting for the next Social Security check. You want to make sure that you have a certain type of retirement that you're enjoying, but how can you set yourself up for that retirement, right? So these are just some reasons and goals for you to invest, whether it's going to be long-term or short-term. So once you've identified that goal, right, so you have to think of how much time do I have for it? Am I retiring in 20 years? Am I retiring in 5 years? So if you have a shorter, what's called a time horizon, then maybe your goal of investing will be more on income or more on preservation of capital, because you have less time for it, right? So maybe your kids are already 13 or 15 and you have a couple of years left before they go to college versus, okay, they're just a newborn and you have 18 years. So the amount of time that you have for a goal will affect your investment strategy. If there's still a very long time for that goal, then you can focus more on, let's say, the capital growth phase, where you can really take use of time to watch your investment kind of build up. So we're going to talk a little bit about some habits of successful investors. And I'm going to focus on 3 of them here. And they're going to be not trying to time the market, understanding emotional bias, and understanding volatility. Because I feel like they can be tied with one concept. So I'm sure that many of you here in the audience, you've been on flights, right? Have you flown from one place to another? Yes? Okay, very good. So let's say that you're on a flight from point A to B, and then you're experiencing turbulence on that flight. It gets shaky, you get a little nervous, and there's some turbulence. Now, I can very confidently say that none of you have at that point gone to the pilot and have said, let me off this plane. There's turbulence, I want to get off, right? So the market works in a very similar way. The market has its ups and downs. The market has its volatility, but you have to keep that end goal in mind. You know, you have to keep in mind, okay, my goal is retirement, and even though the market is having its ups and downs, even though things are happening in the market, I'm focused on my retirement goal, and I'm going to ride this turbulence through. So you have to understand your emotions and learn how to overcome that bias the same way that you're not going to go to a pilot in a plane and tell him to let you off midair because of some turbulence, right? So that's one of the habits of successful investors. So now that you've decided, okay, I want to invest for my future, how do I do it? What are the different types of investments? And we started off, talking about many things we can do. And different types of investments are mutual funds that are Islamic compliant, managed securities, other holdings. If you want to diversify, people tend to love things like gold and real estate. And of course, there's stocks, blue chip stocks, growth stocks. You might have heard of emerging markets, or you might have heard of sukuk, which are Islamic certificates that are essentially like shared ownership in an asset, let's say. Now, one of the first goals we talked about was investing for college, right? So if you have kids and whatever age they're at, maybe they're super young, or maybe there's just a couple of years, and you want to invest for college, you know that costs have gone up so much. So on average, public college costs increased 2% beyond inflation over the past decade. And if you take a look at this graph here, you can see how since 1992, the average private school tuition has almost doubled, and the average public school tuition has almost tripled. So a private nonprofit four-year, right now, it's costing about $40,000. So you really don't want to be in the position where all of a sudden, your child is graduating high school and they're all excited that, hey, I got into this school, and then you look at the tuition bill and it's $40,000, and it's going to cost you $40,000, and you weren't prepared for that. Now what? So when we don't keep up with properly investing and making sure that we're keeping up with the costs of tuition and school, we fall into the trap of debt. So if you are all familiar with student loans, and we don't want to be paying interest, that's not halal. But when you're not investing and saving, and if you don't have certain planning methods in place, then you do fall into this trap. And people that haven't saved accordingly, you can see that over time that debt has only gone up. The 2019 metric shows that it's almost at $29,000 as far as average student debt goes, which means that if you remember the $39,000 number, it means that they were only able to afford $10,000 of what they needed. That's all they had, and the rest had to go into debt. So what are the options, right? One option is a state-sponsored 529 plan. Now, the thing about this is there are no halal choices for that at the moment. That is something we're working on. But because this is an educational session, we do want you to know that this is one of the options, right? You could do a state-sponsored 529 plan. They have certain contribution limits, and then the distributions from them are tax-free if you use the money for higher education purposes. Now, as far as what we can help you with something called an education savings account, an ESA. So this can be used for higher and primary education. You can contribute $2,000 per year per child, and you have to distribute by age 30. But this is one of the ways to have an education savings account for your child in a halal way with us through Amana Mutual Funds. The other option, and this one allows more flexibility, it's called a Uniform Gift to Minors account, or an UGMA account. So what's good about this one is that this can be used for purposes other than education. So maybe your child, they grow up and maybe they got a scholarship, alhamdulillah, and they don't really need the money. But maybe instead they're going to use this money to buy a house. Maybe they can use this to start a business. Maybe they can use this to get married. But at the end of the day, they're getting a much better start to their life versus starting out with nothing, right? So with the UGMA accounts that we offer, they do come with more flexibility versus an education savings account. Now let's say, right, when your child was born, you started investing $1,000 per year for them, right? Now, assuming a 7% rate of return by the time they're about to go to college, in that ESA account, you have almost $35,000. We remember that number, right? For the 4-year tuition rate, it was $39,000. Now you're only down about $4,000. So versus you opening up that tuition bill and seeing $40,000, now, okay, you have 35, you only need 5,000 extra. And that's a lot less of a burden, right? And now you get to be excited, you get to be happy because you know that you planned, you invested, and you're set up for success. So some resources around college, around maybe financial aid or the Islamic Scholarship Fund, those are available here for you to refer to. But that's for your kids, right? What about for you? What about your own retirement? What are options for you there? So as far as retirement goes, people tend to think of different sources of income, right? They think about, okay, I'll have my personal savings, maybe some investments, maybe I'll have a pension plan, I'll get my Social Security, or maybe some people plan that they're going to work through retirement, right? So these are some different options as far as personal savings and investments goes. Now, the ones highlighted in the beige orange, the annuities, the bonds, and CDs, those are not halal because those are the ones that pay interest, but the ones in white, those all offer halal options as far as sources of income for you in your retirement. So we're going to do a little giveaway. Who can guess what the average Social Security check amount looks like right now? Go ahead. $2,000 a month? How about you in the back? $600? $800? $500? Okay, we'll take one last one. $1,200? So the actual average Social Security check is $1,841. So we're gonna do a giveaway to whoever said 2,000 because you were closest. Yeah, sorry? Oh, okay, so the average Social Security check right now, it's this number. Let's put this in context. The average rent for an apartment building, for like an apartment in the US right now, it's $1,700. The average rent for a small one-family home, it's $2,000. So these are just rent prices. Now, if your Social Security check is barely making that rent, what are you going to do to eat and do other things in your life, right? So Social Security on its own, it will not be enough to get you through retirement, right? So you need to make sure that you have a main source of retirement with Social Security kind of just being, the extra, the backup. This can't be your plan A. So employment during retirement, that seems like a bit of a paradox, right? Like you're retired, but you're employed. Like, what does that mean? So what this graph basically shows is that 79% of people, they think that they won't even have enough money during retirement, so they're going to continue working. They already think that. 29% of people had to work for pay after retiring because they found in retirement that they still needed income. Now, 48% of people, and inshallah this will be all of us, they retired earlier than planned because their retirement accounts, their investment accounts allowed them to do that because of their disciplined saving and investing. Now this is my favorite slide. If I was able to just present one slide to you, it would be this one, because this is essentially the roadmap to wealth as I see it. So how many of you, when you retire, would like $285,000 in your retirement account? How many of you? Nope, you guys don't like money? Yes? So let's say that at age 45, you started investing $6,500 a year. That's almost, like, let's say a little over $500 a month into a retirement account at age 45. And at 7% rate of return annually, by the time you're at retirement, you're at $285,000. And that is a good amount of money. Now, let's say you started a decade earlier. Let's say you're 35 and you started investing for retirement. We're going to use the same numbers, a little over $500 a month, 7% rate of return annually. Now look at what happens to that growth. It more than doubles to $656,000, even if you start at age 35. Let's say you're just starting your career right now, or let's say that you have kids in college and they graduated, they're starting their first jobs, they're learning what a retirement account is, and you can have this conversation with them. Now let's say at age 25, they are to start contributing to their retirement accounts. Again, we're using same numbers, $500 a month, 7% annual rate of return. Look at what they're ending with at that retirement now at 65, $1.4 million almost. So who wants $1.4 million in their retirement account, right? So that's the difference between not being prepared and being prepared. So properly saving and investing for the long term can change the outcome of how you spend your retirement. Are you going to spend it working? Are you going to spend it waiting for Social Security checks? Or are you going to spend it resting and relaxing and spending time with your family because your retirement account is there to take care of you? Right? So this is the roadmap to wealth. Whether you start at 25, whether you start at 35 or 45, it's never too late. So when you're an investor, your best friend is time. That's what's on your side. Now, the difference between these two bars. Now, the one on the left, that shows somebody who invested, let's say, $10,000 at the age of 25. They took $10,000, they're 25 years old, and they left it in an account. At 65, that has grown to $112,000. Now, let's say someone waited 1 decade. They waited until they were 35. And they said, hey, at first I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to pay my student loans, I have to get married, so I'm not going to invest yet. I'll do it when I'm 35, when I'm ready. Then they're 35 and they say, hey, okay, so I didn't invest before, so now I'm going to invest even more. So let's say they invest $30,000, right? Because they're trying to catch up. The same person at retirement, that $30,000, it has grown to $101,000. So the point is that time is your best friend when it comes to investments, and saving less money over a longer period of time is better versus putting it off for later, I'll do it later, and then trying to invest more for a less amount of time. So now that we know the importance and the power of investing for the long term, how do we do it? So we offer a few different options, right? One option is a traditional individual retirement account, IRA. Now, it does have some contribution limits, and with traditional IRAs, they grow tax-free, but you do have to pay income tax on distribution. So when you take that money out during retirement, you will have to pay income tax on it. So we do have options for you to just be able to open up an IRA on our own website with a MANA. You can do that with as little as $100 to start, but that's one option is a traditional IRA. Now the other option is a Roth. With Roth, they also have limits, $6,500 for 2023. And if you remember, a lot of the numbers that we used, they were all based on $6,500, a little over $500 a month. The cool thing about a Roth is it's also tax-free growth. It's non-deductible now, but you don't pay any income tax when you take the money out at distributions. So you have both options. And again, this is also something that we offer. Now, as far as employer plans, if you're already working, you should definitely look into, okay, do I have a 401k? Do I have a 403b? These are set by your job, like whoever your employer is. They're setting the match, they're setting what the limit, how much you can get from them, they're offering the benefits. So this is something you have to find out from your employer. and you can take advantage of whatever they're offering as far as like a match benefit, but this is all employer options. Or if you switch jobs and you have an old 401k with your old job and it's kind of just sitting there, you can roll it over with us, and then now it's going to be invested in our Halal fund, and it's going to be in a rollover IRA. If you're a business owner, this is also something we offer. If you have less than 100 employees, then we can help you with a simple IRA, and then we can always connect one-on-one if you want more details on that as a business owner. So, but how do we do this all Islamically? Like, what does that mean? Like, what is investing according to Islamic principles? So we're going to go over that a little bit, right? So Amana Mutual Funds Trust, we're the oldest and largest operating Islamic compliant mutual fund in the U.S. Amana Income Fund, that's our oldest fund. It was established in 1986. And we're going to go back in time here a little bit and talk a little bit about Dr. Yaqub Mirza, who's the founder. And this was originally his vision. So back in the 1980s, when he was still a student, him and, he was with another group of students, they were thinking about, okay, what are some Islamic ways that we can invest? And how can we make this available nationwide? So they had the vision for the Islamic Mutual Fund, and they partnered with StrategicGiving Capital to really bring that to life. And how do we do this? We have an advisor, Amani advisors. They're making sure that we're doing everything in a way that complies with the Islamic faith. They review the portfolios on a quarterly basis to make sure that everything is Sharia compliant. And they're the ones that are the third party that's really verifying us. These are some of the guidelines for Islamic investing as far as what kind of companies are in our funds. So any sector that's haram, it's not going to be in our funds. And this is an example of a few. Then the companies that we invest in, they also have to go through a strict financial screening. What does this mean? This means that we know our companies really well compared to maybe other mutual funds, because we have to do a lot of homework on them to make sure that they're Sharia compliant, to make sure that they're companies that we really want in our funds. So this shows a little bit about return. So over here, you can see how the amount of growth in green compares to the S&P 500. The S&P 500, that's the 500 largest companies on the New York Stock Exchange. And in the blue, you can see the Amana Income Fund. Now, you're going to notice that the Amana Growth Fund has, done really well. It's been beating the S&P. But then you're also going to see that the Amana Income Fund, the blue one, it's under the gray line. What does that mean? Does that mean it's not a good fund? Does that mean it's underperforming? Absolutely not. It just means that the two funds have different goals. So earlier we talked about long-term goals and short-term goals, right? So with long-term goals, those might be more suitable for one type of fund versus something more conservative or more short-term, which would be suitable for another type of fund. And based on that, the funds will have different performances. Now, the other option that we spoke about earlier was sukuk. So compared to conventional bonds, which are not permissible because one, they pay interest, and two, they're essentially just extension of credit. They don't really have any tangible asset underneath. Sukuk are a way for you to invest in a conservative way with actual ownership as part of profit sharing in an actual, let's say, asset or service or business. So I'm going to finish talking a little bit about risk. Now, when people hear risk, they think loss, they think stocks, they think, okay, I can't do that, I won't be able to sleep at night. But you really do have to know your risk tolerance. And you have to also know that we can't avoid risk completely, ever. We take risks when we go outside. We take risks when we get into a car and get on the roads. We take risks in everything in life. And similar to everything else, when it comes to investments, you can't avoid the risk, but we are supposed to manage it. And when you manage that risk properly, you set yourself up for success. So you've all been really great and paid attention, and no one really took out their phones. But right now, I want you to take out your phones so that you can take a picture of this with our contact info. And if you see the QR code up there, you're going to be able to book an appointment through that code as well. But you're going to be able to see the contact information for the regional managers, and also you'll be able to make an appointment if you scan the code. And of course, lastly, when you are investing, make sure you're doing your homework, you're investing with caution, make sure you're speaking to a professional advisor, and not just kind of doing it blindly, doing it on your own. Make sure you're doing it with caution, and make sure you're doing your homework. And then I'll also kind of give you some more time for the slide in case you didn't get a picture earlier. And then from there, I'm going to give it over to Owaiz, who's going to talk a little bit more on something more specific.
Nice to see you all. I'm glad you all came and got to see what Samar presented. Because as you know, if you've been to khutbahs every week, during your lifetime, you've probably heard the khatib at some point mention how important it is to basically earn in a halal way, right? Instead of working at a liquor store, to use the widest range of places we could work, right? A liquor store or something. You want to work in a place that's halal, a place that your income is halal, and then you're spending your way through life in a halal fashion as well, right? You don't want to buy things that are haram, of course. You don't want to walk into a casino and or buy something that's not part of our deen, right? Something that's haram. And then you're saving in a halal way as well. Many of us, when we receive interest in our bank account, we have the bank take it back out, right? You can have an agreement with them. I don't even want to touch it. Don't give it to me, right? So you're saving in a halal fashion as well, or you're keeping your main account at a big bank, and then you might have a credit union bank account where you have a checking account earning no interest, and that's your savings account. These are the things that Muslims do, right? And we also need to invest in a halal way, which many American Muslims and actually Muslims around the world have not really understood, is that it's not just earning and spending your money and how you house your money, it's also how you invest your money. So if you might say, well, I don't really invest my money, I'm good. Well, you have a 401k, or maybe your banker told you to get into a 529 plan. And I was just reviewing this on Friday, somebody, because besides the trust company, I'm also director of Islamic investing, so I wear multiple hats. So I was talking to somebody on Friday, and they were telling me that their company allows them to put 25% of their retirement account into a brokerage account. But what about the other 75%? Which one of these funds is halal for me? And so I was looking through it, and I said, well, impossible, because every one of them has something that you don't want, right? But he's trying to do as much as he can until the company will get to 100% of the money being able to invest it in something that's compliant. So this is a takeaway for you as well. You can go back to your company, with your 401k and ask them that, look, based on my faith principles, I need to make this, an opportunity for me to invest the way I want to. So please open up the brokerage account for me within my 401k or 403b or 457 and allow me to invest that way. But one of the things is, look, you clean up your investments, you do your earning, your spending, everything in a halal fashion. And then what about passing along your money and your home and investments upon your death? Have we thought about that? I gave a presentation last, or maybe 2 Sundays ago, at a masjid local to me in Southern California. And it was a good group because they were very honest. And so, I had them raise their hand. How many of you have a plan for when you pass away? And there were 2 people that did out of the 25 people that were there. That's 10%. I imagine it's somewhere in the same realm here. We might have the same numbers, right? So, but we know that even in the Quran, it talks about how specifically you're going to distribute your wealth upon your death. But just like we haven't thought about cleaning up our financial life in this life, we haven't thought about it upon our passing as well. But it is incumbent on us to do that. And if you create a trust or will, I'm not going to help you with that, so I'm not getting paid on this, but I want you to make sure to go back home and make this one of your, we're at the end of 2023. What a great time to think about what you want to do for 2024. The things that Samar mentioned to you, and then also what I'm going to mention to you here. So figure out who you want to work with as in terms of an attorney. And we can provide that to you. And if you noticed, I haven't even passed slide 1 yet, have I? But I'll go through everything quickly because I've gone through most of what I want to talk about today. So this is not legal advice. It's not tax advice. I'm giving you some pointers, and then it's up to you to go back and learn or get in touch, etc. So as you're planning ahead for the next life, you have to consider what the Prophet ﷺ said. he said, if you have something of value, you cannot travel more than 2 days without having a will. Okay? So again, I mentioned about what's in the Quran, about specifically how you're going to distribute upon your death. But how's that going to get carried out, right? And what the Prophet ﷺ said specifically to us. So, there's wills and trust. If you don't have a will or a trust, nobody knows what you want to do with your money. Nobody knows in the world, right? Now, if you have a will, it'll specifically say, I want this much to go to my spouse. I want this much to go to my son, my daughter, this person, this charity, etc. If you have a will, that's a great starting point. But there's something called probate, which you may not have heard of. Maybe you have. Maybe some of you have. But probate means that even if you have just a will, before the money can be distributed, the state that you live in is going to have to figure out exactly what you meant, okay? Because there's going to be certain things that are not part of your will, and then there are certain things that are part of your will, but still the court will decide where everything's going. And it's going to be an open process. So if one of your community members says, wow, this person passed away, I wonder what his will says, it's an open process. They can go look it up in the court. So there's no privacy there. And it costs money. So the court has to, use their resources to be able to figure out what you really meant in your will. But it's a good basis for them, right? The will is a good basis. But the probate process costs anywhere between 0.5% all the way up to 3 to 5% of your total wealth. So imagine if you had $2 million, and what is 10% of that would be $200,000. So we're looking at $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, and you won't be able to distribute until the court decides that all of this is good and we're good to move forward. Now, I'll give you a quick example. Before I got here on Wednesday, one of my uncles had passed away over the last weekend, so we buried him. And the cost in Southern California of where he was buried, it cost about $23,000, right? Now, imagine not having access to money as you're going through if he had young children, and the children need money, the spouse needs money to pay the mortgage, but everything is locked up now because the person passed away and didn't have a proper process. So even with the will, you're going to have a probate process. It's not a fun process. It's going to cost you a lot of money, right? It's going to cost your family a lot of money and headaches down the road. So what you could do instead is you can create a trust. And I'm going to talk about that next. You can take a snapshot of this if you'd like. But again, put this in your 2024 list of things that you want to do, right? So it avoids the probate process. It basically says, here's where everything is going. Here's what I'm mandating. It can't be changed, right, by somebody else. It can be changed by you along your lifetime. It's irrevocable. It allows privacy, so no one's going to see this except who you say are the trustees, the beneficiary, the executor. And then let's say, how many of you, and don't raise your hand on this one, but how many of you, think about this, know somebody in your family or one of your friends that's going through, mental something like dementia, for example, right? I know more than one person in my extended family that's going through that, and I know people that have passed along the way that had that as well. So if somebody has an incapacity issue, they have dementia, they have some other issue, Alzheimer's, they can no longer process and do things for themselves. So the court could step in and say, we will now take over this, because there's no trust that says who is going to take over in case of incapacity, right? It also, my uncle that passed away that we buried on Wednesday, he had, the last 2 or 3 days or so, he was not able to communicate. So during that time, what's going to happen, right? And what does he want in terms of his last moments? Does he want to be kept on an artificial lung or some type of device to keep him alive forever, right? For as long as you can to extend that life, but he's in a coma or not being able to do anything, right? So you get to mention all those things. You get to mention who is going to be the person that's going to take care of your younger children, right? So the ones that are under 18, who's going to take care of them? You can specify that. You can say who's going to be the person that's going to manage the assets when I pass away. All of those things can be done. It's very difficult to contest. It's like almost ironclad kind of thing. And you can also have professional management. This is where we do come in. So if you do have a trust, and you have a complicated trust, and you don't want your cousin necessarily to look at all the things that you had in your life because you never shared anything in your lifetime, and now you're sharing, your cousin is your executor of this will. So, and they may not even know how to do it, right? And they may not want to do it because there's going to be some complexity. So you could hire a trust company like ours, Saturna Trust, or anyone else. And if you don't, that's okay too. Just make sure to find the right person, the person that is saying, yes, I will take this on for you, right? Now, if you want a list of attorneys, you can contact us. We have built up a list of attorneys throughout the country, California to New York, right? And most places in between. The cost can be anywhere from $1,500 to $15,000 on a trust. But consider a trust as important as anything else in your spiritual practice, right? So don't look at it as just a cost. Of course, compare and everything, but look at it as an act of worship because you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing and passing this along in the right way. When we're going for Umrah or Hajj, we're not looking for the absolute cheapest ihram, right? We're looking for something that fits the needs. If it's going to cost $100 or $140, whatever's there, I'm going to buy that. Same thing when you're burying someone. Okay, you're going to look at the cemeteries, but at the end of the day, you're not going to the cemetery and saying, what kind of discount can I get, right? You can try to get the best deal possible here, but move forward with it because it's incumbent on us to do that. Just a quick few other slides that I want to mention here. If you have a trust, you can also mention where you want the money to go in terms of charities. So you can have it go to, the nonprofit of your choice, your local masjid. You can go up to 33%. Most people will do 5 to 10% of their money, upon their death. They'll say, this organization is going to get 5% of my wealth or $20,000. So you can continue giving even upon your death, right? It's a nice thing to do. Now, if you think about people outside of the Muslim community, how do they grow their wealth? Like, people give money to Harvard and everything, right? Harvard and Yale and all these colleges and large hospital chains and whatnot. And a lot of people will do this upon their death. They can't part with it during their lifetime, right? But they will part with it upon their death. So this is how endowments are created. Samar mentioned an endowment for yourself. If you get to $1 million in your retirement account, that's a personal endowment, right? You can take 7%, 10% of that per year, $70,000, $100,000 per year, and you'll still most likely have $1 million even if you reach 150 years of age. So we want to build up our organizations as well, and if we all put in 5% or some number to the masjid endowment or nonprofit endowment, that will help everyone as well. Okay, I'm just going to finish in like 2 or 3 minutes here. So the bequest is what I was talking about there, and then the rules of where your inheritors, what percentage they'll get, that's all going to be handled by the Islamic estate planning attorney. So make sure you pick the right person. I'm going to skip through these. There's something that we don't take advantage of in our community all that often. Many of us have to pay a lot of money in zakat, right? 2.5% of our wealth. So you might be paying $5,000, $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 a year. But we usually write a check. But what if you have some built up asset? What if you bought a mutual fund 20 years ago? What if you bought, I won't mention any stock names, but you bought a stock of a company that provides, cars that are plug-in cars, okay? And you bought it for $10 and now it's $240. And so you have a massive capital gain, right? Massive capital gain. And you say, okay, I have like $200,000 of this stock. I raised my hand at the fundraiser for the masjid for $10,000 or $20,000. How can I do this? I'm going to write a check? No, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give $10,000 or $20,000 of that stock to my nonprofit or the masjid that has the brokerage account set up. And then what I'll do, I don't want to give up this particular company. I still want this. I'm going to go buy $20,000 more of this stock at today's value. So when you sell that $20,000 down the road, you're going to be selling at a higher dollar amount. You got rid of the shares that were at a lower dollar amount. You get the tax donation receipt for the full amount of the gift that you gave. So there's really no reason to write a check to a nonprofit organization. And if they don't have a brokerage account yet set up, let us know. We can help them. We've done this for, when you go down to the bazaar, when you take a look at all of the different nonprofits, for most of them, we've opened up their brokerage account so they have this opportunity to receive donated stocks and mutual funds. The last slide here talks about a donor advised fund. This is for people that come to us at the end of the year. This happens, right? Business owners or people that got a huge bonus and they say, look, I'm gonna have to pay a whole bunch of tax this year. What other tax opportunities do I have, like tax, savings opportunities? Because I've already given my zakat, my sadaqah for the year. I don't want to give any more this year. Like next year I'll do it, but not this year. So if you open up a donor advised fund and you say, I need to give $50,000, but I don't want to give this to a charity, you're going to give it to a 501c3 donor advised fund. You'll get your $50,000 donation receipt this year. And then next year you start giving out money from that account. And it can be invested as well. If you go through, for example, American Muslim Community Foundation, they invest in the Amana funds for their clients as well. And so your 50,000, inshallah, is growing, right? And it's becoming more. And so you can donate more down the road. So now every year you give 20,000 or 30,000, whatever amount you want from that 50,000, and you can add more money to it as well. So this is a tax saving opportunity. It's a way to figure out how you want to donate to your favorite charities. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you have huge tax liability issues. So with that, I will end it there, and I guess we can take some questions. Amjad will come back up here. Thank you for listening, and we'll take your questions now. Assalamu alaikum.
Couple of quick points before we get started on the questions, inshallah. One is, again, we want to make sure all your questions are answered. Whatever we can't do here, please just stop by and ask us. Everyone has expertise in different fields. One thing I like to focus on is your work 401k. There's a very, very good chance that you'll be able to keep it halal. Just talk to us. We've helped many companies, Intel, Cisco. I was recently talking to someone from University of Michigan, some of the local hospitals even. You can get Islamic funds within your 401k, so don't feel like that's not an option. Zakat, we have zakat calculations for our clients, something we can help with. What is the best time to invest? Thank you. Yesterday. What's the second best time to invest? That's right. Everyone seemed to answer that, so please come get your prizes. If you don't get it here, you can get it at our booth. And then, sometimes when we hear things like donor advised funds or LLC, after COVID, I really felt like, oh man, I really need an LLC. And so, my wife has a little small business, so I would keep asking my accountant, can we do an LLC so I can get all the tax benefit? He's like, no. He's like, you're just going to make your life complicated for no reason. So don't feel like everything you hear you need. You definitely need a trust. Donor advised fund, LLC is not for everyone. Even though my wife and I both work, my accountant said it, and I didn't believe him, so I asked a friend of mine who's an accountant, he said the same thing. He's like, you're just trying to make your life complicated, so just keep that in mind. There's simple solutions to help you do what you need to do, and inshallah, we'll do our best to do that. With that, we'll open it up for questions. We have about 20 minutes, and then you can see us outside or at our booth. In the back, gentleman with his hand really high. Okay. You want me to do it? You got it. Okay, so there's a vast degree of answers. I was just at MAS Houston, and I gave Islamic finance session with Dr. Ma'in al-Quda. So you'll find someone, the two extremes are the full 2.5% every year, and then only one person says this, so please do not follow this one, is not to pay on any of it. So the in-between, you'll find a couple of different solutions. Amja goes with subtract out what you can, what amount you would have that year. So take out your taxes and then pay 2.5% on that. Sheikh Hussein Abdul Sattar, who's local, has another opinion. Both of them are online, and I would tell you to come see us because I don't want you not to have the right answer, but whatever method you decide to do, and we have a third method which treats your investments like crops where you pay on the gains. So whatever method you decide to do, don't flip-flop year to year is my only advice, but all of them I believe are valid. Just stay with the one that you feel most comfortable with. Owaiz will take that, inshallah.
So some really good questions there, thank you. Now, on the zakat piece as well, yes, if you have a 401k, you're not going to take money out from that, right? You're going to take money out from your personal checking account and make that payment. And your question now was about what? Give me your question again, and I'll repeat it. Oh yeah, so how did we come up with the 5% rule? So there's an organization called AOFI, the Accounting and Auditing Organization of Islamic Financial Institutions, and they initially said, as long as it's less than 10%, right? And then they went all the way down to 5%. If you look at, just as an example, the amount of income and growth funds, the two largest ones that we have starting in 1986 and 1994, the haram revenue from them is less than 1%. And we actually have a purification calculator on our website. You can put in the number of shares that you have and it'll tell you how much haram revenue there is. But the reason they came up with that is they said, if you have something small and if you have some, najas or corruption in it, it can make the entire thing najas, right? But if you have something large enough and you have a small amount of najas in there, it doesn't necessarily corrupt the entire thing. So they use this in many different parts of our lives, the same kind of ruling. And something similar on the debt ruling as well, but we'll stick with that for now. And then I think we have a question right next to you in the front. Yes. Yes.
Yes, sister.
Go ahead. How do you know how much you had already from interest? Yeah. Well, if you opened up your IRA account long ago at a bank, if you went into Chase and you opened up what's that? Fidelity, okay. But if you went into, let's say, Chase or something like that, they could have sold you a bank IRA, so it'd be sitting in a certificate of deposit or a savings account. You would know exactly how much interest you had. But if you invested in Fidelity or Schwab into some type of investment, and you have Vanguard, S&P 500 fund, or something from Fidelity or something, it's difficult to figure that out. So you're going to have to make your best judgment on what that might be. Make niyyah moving forward that you're going to clean up your act, and purify as much as you can. Zakah is also an act of purification, so inshallah, as long as you've been paying that as well, that will be some type of purification as well.
Yes.
If you do the dollar advisory fund, and then let's say it started with 100K, and by the time you distribute the donations was 110, you get a tax break from the original donation on the original amount or the final amount?
Right, so if you give $100,000 to your donor advice fund called whatever foundation you want to call it, or just your name, and it becomes $110,000 at some point, do you get a tax advantage for that extra amount? You do not. You just get it at the time that you give and by the way, you can also transfer assets into your donor advice fund. It doesn't have to be a written check. It could be those shares of that stock that I mentioned, right? Or a mutual fund, and you can fund it that way, but it's going to be at the time of the contribution.
Go ahead.
If you invest in an S&P 500 index fund or something, and it has less than 33% banks, would that be considered halal?
Right, so if you have banks, that's one of the things that we take out. That's one of the sectors we take out is banking, because it's purely riba, right? It's a riba-based system. So we take out, most insurance companies will not fit in there as well. Banks certainly will not. I know in the S&P 500, there's one casino as well. There might be alcohol, so.
If I mentioned, S&P 500 index, they were like 12% of it is financial.
Right.
Which includes all the insurance and banks and so on.
Right.
But, so the problem, I'm going to be honest with you, first, your funds have been not growing over the last 15 years.
Wow.
That's number one. Number two, your overhead is way expensive.
Okay.
It's almost
Okay.
80 to 100 times more than, usual S&P 500.
Okay.
Now, I know that you guys have overhead and you have to pay for your
Okay, I got the question. So let me answer that. So if you have a regular S&P 500 fund, that's the kind of thing that you're trying to clean up. Now, in terms of returns, you mentioned that our returns are not where they need to be. I'll just give you an example. This is September 30, 2023, so a couple months ago, quarter ending. If you look at the amount of growth fund that was started in 1994, The 10-year return is 13.82% per year on average. The S&P 500 is 11.91%. So come take a look at this before you make those kinds of quotations.
How much funds you have, not how much return you have. Your funds, did it grow?
That's what that's talking about. This is the growth of the fund. So that's what the return is.
We've
But
grown
anyway,
both in assets, and our returns are better than the S&P 500, so I'm not sure where you're getting your
Yeah.
information, but on both accounts, we've grown tremendously, and as Owaiz mentioned, we've beaten the S&P 500 over the last 10 years.
the other thing
by a
to,
very
oh,
good
sorry.
amount.
The other thing to look at in terms of returns, and return, you could have a good return year, you could have a bad return year, it depends, right? But this fund, alhamdulillah, for the long term has done really well. The returns that you see in here, if you're looking at returns, they're net of expenses, so it's after the expense has already been incurred. So beating the S&P 500 by 1.5% per year for the last 10 years, and since inception in 1994, after taking out the expenses, it's quite a feat. And then, Samar mentioned the income fund as well. Saturna now, managing the MANA funds, has over $7 billion in assets. So alhamdulillah, it's been growing, not only from people coming directly to us, but buying at Fidelity or through their 401k and so forth. Yes.
So I have two questions.
If you want to answer any, just pull it, okay?
So one is like, I saw the statutory participation fund. I didn't look at the percentages of like, I guess the dividend. So I saw it remained flat, which is mostly flat. It was fine. So it is the percentages, you are taking percentages out of it, maybe reinvesting. So I just, yeah, so there is a percentage of it.
There's so on the Sukuk, there is a dividend. He was asking about the participation fund, which is Sukuk fund, whether it has a dividend. It does have a dividend that's associated with it. So if you're getting a dividend, let's call it 1.5% per year, it doesn't mean that you're going to end up positive even with receiving that dividend at the end of the year, right? Because bonds and Sukuk work in a similar fashion. So let's say I issued a Sukuk and the equivalent return was 3%. Okay, if you make it into a percentage, it's a 3% return. And then things got more expensive, inflation happened, and the next person like me in a company issues another Sukuk for you to buy, and that one's 5% equivalent return. So now, if you want to come and buy my Sukuk or this person's Sukuk, you're going to say, look, if I'm going to sell you, if you're buying mine, why would I pay you the full amount of $100,000 for that Sukuk? It's only a 3% equivalent return when I can go get this one and get a 5% return. So if I really want to sell it, I'm going to have to sell it to you for $90,000 instead, right? And so that's how the pricing occurs. That's why you'll see there is a dividend, but at the end of the year, you could have a negative return, potentially, right? Just depending on all of the Sukuk that you own. Good question, thank you. Let's go to the back in the red. Come back around. Not exactly like that. I mean, it's basically okay, let me give you an example since we're getting on Sukuk, right? We don't usually get this many questions on Sukuk. People usually want to invest a lot in stocks. But this is a great question. So if you have, I mentioned how General Motors, if they issue a bond because they want to redo their factory, right? All the robots in their factory. So they might issue a $5 billion bond and with a 5% return. Payable back in 30 years. So you buy a $100,000 bond, in 30 years you get paid back, but every year you get paid 5%. Whereas Emirates Airlines, they created a Sukuk a number of years ago for $1 billion or so. They bought 3 or 4 planes from that. So in the case of General Motors collapsing, you'll be left with a piece of paper that will say you have a bond, which is just debt, right? And so you'll get paid pennies if they collapse. You won't get part of the factory. In the case of the Emirates Airlines, the planes that were purchased were put into a special purpose vehicle. And so if Emirates Airlines collapses, the owners of the Sukuk get to take that and sell it to another company like American Airlines or Etihad or somebody like that. So that's how there's a difference in it. And we're just going to take a few more quick questions here because I know people are coming in for the next session. And we thank you all for your questions. If you have more, we'll stick around, inshallah. Sorry we didn't get to your multiple questions, but we will answer those questions. The gentleman all the way in the back in the brown jacket. Go ahead. Right, so the question is about there's many Muslims that want to invest in real estate. Real estate could be a great investment, right? I know people that have retired off of real estate. They kept buying homes, and all they do now, they're 55 years old, they go and they collect the check from the rental property. They have like 6 or 7 homes. It's great. But if you're starting off like my daughter, when she started her Roth IRA when she was 19, she couldn't go out and buy real estate, right? And your local masjid, when they start their endowment and they have nothing to start with, and they start collecting, they have $100,000, they're not gonna go buy a $3 million property necessarily. But what they could do is they could easily invest in something like a mutual fund, like a MANA mutual funds as an example. And as you invest there, you can grow it to a point where then you can go invest it in real estate. The beauty of a mutual fund is the professional money manager takes care of everything for you, right? They select the stock, they figure out the sharia compliance of the stock in an ongoing fashion. Whereas if you go buy real estate, if you're doing it on your own, you are going to manage those things. If you have the ability and the, the time and everything, the resources to do that, it could be an amazing investment as well. We've seen that throughout the country. People have, built great wealth through that. So we're not discounting real estate as well. Mutual fund investing with stocks and sukuk is definitely another option for people. And again, thank you very much. I'll pass it back up to Amjad, and we'll stick around outside to answer any other questions. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.